The sun painted the Montana sky blood red as Nora Davenport's shovel bit into the dry earth, each strike more desperate than the last. Sweat and tears mingled on her dirt-streaked face as she dug what she believed would be her final resting place. The year was 1878, and in her 22 years of life, she'd never imagined it would end like this alone on the outskirts of Fort Benton, Montana territory, with nothing but the approaching sunset to witness her despair. The hole was nearly 3 feet deep when the sound of hoofbeats broke the rhythm of her labored breathing. Nora didn't stop digging. What did it matter if someone saw her? By morning, she'd be gone anyway, one more tragedy in a land that collected them like some men collected bounties. "Madam." The voice was deep, cautious. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" Nora paused, her knuckles white around the shovel handle, but didn't look up. "What does it look like I'm doing?" Her voice was raw from hours without water. The rider dismounted with a creak of leather. His shadow fell across the shallow grave she'd been digging. "Looks to me like you're digging your own grave." He wasn't asking a question, and I'd say that's about the saddest thing I've ever come across. Nora finally raised her eyes. The man before her wore trail-worn clothes, a dusty brown hat, and a weathered gunbelt. His face was tanned from years under the sun, but his eyes, a startling blue against his weathered skin, held no judgment, only concern. She guessed him to be in his late 20s. "Your powers of observation serve you well, Cowboy," she said bitterly. "Now kindly move along and let me finish my business in peace." Instead, the man knelt at the edge of her half-dug grave. "My name's Finn O'Malley. And I don't make a habit of riding away when I find someone at the end of their rope." He studied her for a long moment. "Your life isn't over, miss. It's just beginning." Nora let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You don't know the first thing about my life." "You're right about that," he agreed quietly. "But I know something about desperation, and I know that sunrise looks mighty different from sunset." He extended a calloused hand. "Why don't you come have some coffee? Tell me what's driven you to this point, and if you still want to finish digging come morning, I won't stop you." She stared at his outstretched hand. One night wouldn't change anything. The debts wouldn't disappear, the threats wouldn't stop, the shame wouldn't fade. But something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. "One night," she finally said, taking his hand, "but I don't see what difference it'll make." Finn O'Malley helped her out of the hole. "Sometimes, madam, all the difference in the world happens in just one night." The coffee was strong and hot, brewed over a small campfire Finn had efficiently built 100 yards from Nora's abandoned grave. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky, revealing a canopy of stars that seemed to mock her earthly troubles with their eternal indifference. "My father died 3 months ago," Nora said suddenly, the words falling from her lips unbidden. "Left me with his saloon, his debts, and his enemies." Finn nodded, pouring her another cup. "Fort Benton can be a hard place for anyone, let alone a woman alone. The Davenport Saloon was all he had to leave me, all I had left of him." She wrapped her fingers around the tin cup, drawing warmth from it. "Last night, a man named Victor Hollies came to collect on a debt I didn't know existed. Said my father borrowed heavily to keep the saloon running during the last year. When I couldn't pay, he said he'd take the saloon instead." "Hollies?" Finn's expression darkened. "I know the name. He's been buying up half the businesses along the river, not known for his patience or mercy. He gave me until tomorrow noon to come up with $2,000 or sign over the deed." Nora stared into the fire. "When I refused, his men ransacked the place, said it was just a taste of what would happen if I didn't comply." "And that led you out here with a shovel?" "Hollies doesn't just want the saloon. He made other suggestions about how I might work off the debt." Her voice cracked. "I'd rather die with dignity than live without it." Finn was quiet for a long moment. "Your father was Patrick Davenport," surprised. Nora nodded. "You knew him?" "Met him once, few years back. Honest man in a town that doesn't always reward honesty." Finn poked at the fire with a stick. "I respect what you were trying to do out there, Miss Davenport. Taking control the only way you saw how, but there are always other options." "Like what?" "I've tried everything." The bank won't extend a loan to a woman, especially one who's inherited a failing business. I have no family, no friends with that kind of money. What if I told you I might know a way to save your saloon? Finn said carefully. It wouldn't be easy and it might be dangerous, but it wouldn't involve you lying in that hole you dug. Hope flickered dangerously in Nora's chest. I'm listening. I'm a bounty hunter, Miss Davenport. I track men who have broken the law, bring them in for the reward. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wanted poster. I've been tracking this man for 2 weeks. He robbed a bank in Helena. Reward is $1,500. That's still $500 short, Nora pointed out. I have some savings. $500 I can spare. Nora stared at him incredulously. Why would you do that for a stranger? What's in it for you? Finn's expression was unreadable in the firelight. Let's just say I've seen too many good people pushed to the edge by men like Hollies. Besides, he added with the ghost of a smile, I'm not offering charity, I'm proposing a partnership. A partnership. I help you save your saloon, and in return, you give me a place to base my operations for a while. Fort Benton's centrally located for my line of work. Having a place to stay, maybe a hot meal now and then, it'd be worth the investment. Nora studied him, trying to determine if there was some hidden motive behind his offer. The bounty, you haven't caught this man yet. No, but I know where he's headed. My information says he'll be passing near Fort Benton tomorrow, heading for the Canadian border. So this plan of yours depends on you catching a dangerous criminal in less than a day, Finn nodded. I didn't say it was a perfect plan, but it's better than the one that had you digging that hole. Nora looked back toward the abandoned grave, a dark shadow in the distance. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, Finn admitted. But I'm guessing trust is in short supply in your life right now, and beggars can't be choosers. The brutal honesty of his response surprised a laugh out of her. You're an unusual man, Mr. O'Malley, just Finn is fine. He stood, extinguishing his coffee by pouring the dregs onto the dirt. So do we have a deal, or would you prefer I take you back to your digging? Nora took a deep breath. What did she have to lose? If his plan failed, she'd be no worse off than she was now. We have a deal. But I'm coming with you. Finn's eyebrows shot up. That wasn't part of my offer. It is now. Nora rose to her feet. I won't sit waiting while my fate is decided by someone else, even someone who saved me from myself. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face and made those blue eyes crinkle at the corners. Fair enough, Miss Davenport. We leave at first light. He gestured to a bedroll by the fire. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As Nora settled onto the offered bedroll, she wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday, she'd been a desperate woman with no options. Today, she was placing her trust in a bounty hunter she'd just met, chasing a dangerous criminal for a reward that might save everything she had left. If this was her life just beginning, as Finn O'Malley claimed, it was certainly starting with a bang. True to his word, Finn woke Nora before dawn. They broke camp quickly, and he helped her mount behind him on his sturdy bay gelding. The man we're after is Calvin Reeves, Finn explained as they rode. Robbed the first bank of Helena with 2 accomplices. The others were caught, but Reeves escaped with most of the money. Word is he's meeting a guide who'll take him across the border into Canada. How do you know where to find him? Nora asked, trying to maintain a respectful distance while still holding onto Finn's belt for balance. Man like Reeves leaves a trail. He's been stopping at remote homesteads, sometimes paying for food and shelter, sometimes just taking what he wants. Finn's voice hardened. Last place he stopped, he left the farmer with a broken arm for not having enough food to spare. They rode north along a little-used trail that wound through rolling hills covered with prairie grass. By mid-morning, they reached a shallow river crossing, Whitewater Creek. Finn informed her as they allowed the horse to drink. If my information is correct, Reeves should be meeting his guide at Trapper's cabin about 5 miles upstream from here. What's your plan once we find him? Ideally, I'd catch him by surprise, disarm him, and bring him in without any trouble. Finn adjusted his gun belt. But men facing prison rarely surrender peacefully. Nora swallowed hard. "I'm not afraid," she said, more to convince herself than him. Finn turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You should be. Reeves has killed 2 men that we know of. I shouldn't have agreed to bring you along." "It was my choice," she reminded him. "Besides, it's my saloon at stake. Just stay behind me when the time comes, and if I tell you to run, you run." "Understood," she nodded, though they both knew she had nowhere to run to. They continued along the creek, moving more cautiously now. Finn frequently checked the ground for tracks and signs. About an hour later, he raised his hand for silence, then pointed to a thin column of smoke rising above the trees ahead. "That'll be the cabin," he whispered. "We'll approach on foot from here." They dismounted, and Finn secured his horse to a tree. He removed his rifle from its scabbard and checked that it was loaded before handing Nora a small revolver. "You know how to use this. My father taught me," she said, accepting the weapon, "but I've never shot at a person." "Let's hope today isn't the day you start." Finn's eyes met hers. "Stay close, stay quiet." They crept through the underbrush toward the cabin. It was a small, crude structure with a single window and door. A horse was tethered outside, not 2 horses. Finn noted with a frown, which meant either Reeves or his guide hadn't arrived yet. Finn motioned for Nora to stay put behind a large pine tree while he circled around to get a better view through the window. She watched as he moved silently from tree to tree, his movements careful and practiced. When he reached the side of the cabin, he raised himself just enough to peer through the window, then quickly dropped back down. He made his way back to her. "Reeves is inside," he whispered. "Alone. No sign of the guide yet. This is our chance." Finn explained his plan. He would enter through the front door, keeping Reeves at gunpoint, while Nora would cover the window in case he tried to escape that way. "If anything goes wrong, you head back to the horse and ride for Fort Benton," he instructed. "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "This isn't a debate." His tone left no room for argument. "Now get into position." Nora reluctantly moved to where she could see the window while staying hidden behind a tree. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. She watched as Finn approached the cabin door, rifle ready. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. Finn kicked in the door, shouting for Reeves to put his hands up. There was a gunshot from inside, and Finn ducked as a bullet splintered the doorframe. He returned fire, entering the cabin in a crouch. More gunshots rang out, and Nora stifled a scream. Then silence fell, stretching agonizingly until she could bear it no longer. Breaking her promise to stay put, she rushed toward the cabin, revolver clutched tightly in her trembling hand. "Finn," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's clear," came his reply, though he sounded strained. "Come in slowly." Nora entered to find Reeves sprawled on the cabin floor, blood pooling beneath him from a wound in his chest. Finn was leaning against the table, his left arm gripped tightly with his right hand, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're hurt," she gasped, hurrying to his side. "It's just a graze," he grimaced. "Check if he's still alive. We need him breathing to collect the full reward." Nora knelt beside Reeves, her stomach churning at the sight of so much blood. She pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse. "He's alive, but barely," she reported. "What do we do now?" "Bind his wound as best you can," Finn instructed, nodding toward some rags on a shelf. "Then help me with mine. We need to get him to Fort Benton while he's still breathing." They worked quickly, stopping Reeves bleeding with a makeshift bandage. Then Nora helped Finn remove his shirt to tend to his wound. The bullet had carved a furrow along his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening, as he'd claimed. As she wrapped a clean strip of cloth around his muscular arm, Nora couldn't help noticing the map of old scars that told the story of a dangerous life. Bounty hunting clearly came with its hazards. "Thank you," Finn said quietly when she finished. "You've got steady hands." "My father always said the same thing when I helped tend the cuts and bruises of saloon brawlers," she replied, trying to hide how shaken she felt. They managed to get Reeves secured across his own horse, then mounted Finn's bay together. The journey back to Fort Benton was tense, with Finn fighting pain and blood loss while keeping an eye on their prisoner. Nora found herself pressed closer against his back than before, supporting him as much as he was supporting her. By the time Fort Benton came into view in the late afternoon, Nora was exhausted, Finn was pale from blood loss, and Reeves was drifting in and out of consciousness. They headed directly to the sheriff's office, drawing stares from townspeople unused to seeing the respectable Miss Davenport returning from the wilderness with a wounded man and a notorious outlaw. Sheriff Taylor was a gruff man in his 50s who'd known Nora's father well. His bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline when they entered his office. "Miss Davenport, what in God's name?" His eyes fell on Reeves, slumped between them. "Is that Calvin Reeves?" "It is," Finn confirmed. "I'm Finn O'Malley, bounty hunter. I tracked him from Helena. He needs a doctor if you want him to stand trial." The sheriff sent his deputy for the doctor, then helped them get Reeves into a cell. "The reward notice said $1,500 for him alive," he told Finn. "I'll have to send to Helena to get the money, but I can give you a voucher today." "How long will it take for the actual money?" Nora asked urgently. Sheriff Taylor eyed her curiously. 3 days by stage. Why?" "I need it by noon tomorrow," she explained, her heart sinking. A voucher wouldn't satisfy Holly's. Finn, despite his injury, stepped in. "Sheriff, is there any way you could advance the reward? Miss Davenport is in a difficult situation that can't wait for Helena." The sheriff looked between them, clearly puzzled by their partnership but sympathetic to Nora's plight. "I don't have that kind of money in my official capacity, but—" He hesitated. "Patrick was a good friend. I might be able to help personally, along with some other folks who respected your father." Hope bloomed in Nora's chest. "Really? You do that? Let me see what I can arrange," Taylor said. "In the meantime, get yourselves cleaned up. You both look like you've been dragged behind a stage coach." The doctor arrived then, first tending to Reeves to ensure he would survive for trial, then properly dressing Finn's wound. "Keep it clean," he instructed, "and try not to use that arm for a few days." As they left the sheriff's office, the reality of their situation settled on Nora. "You need rest," she told Finn. "The saloon is just down the street. There's a room you can use." Finn didn't argue, which told her just how exhausted he truly was. The Davenport Saloon was closed at this hour, the aftermath of Holly's men's destruction still evident in the broken furniture and shattered bottles. Nora led Finn upstairs to a small but clean bedroom that had been her father's. "Take this room," she said. "I'll bring up some food and fresh water for washing." When she returned with a tray of bread, cheese, and cold beef, plus a basin of water, Finn was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a photograph he'd found on the nightstand. "Your father?" he asked, holding up the image of Patrick Davenport standing proudly in front of his newly built saloon. Nora nodded, setting down her burdens. "That was taken 10 years ago when he first opened this place. I was 12, had just lost my mother the year before. He built this saloon to give us a fresh start. He looks like a good man." He was. She sat beside him, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. "I almost threw it all away today, everything he worked for, if you hadn't found me." "But I did," Finn said simply. "And tomorrow we'll settle with Holly's." "If the sheriff comes through with the money," she reminded him, "he will, and I still have my 500 to add to it." Nora turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing this, Finn? The truth this time." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Then, 6 years ago, I was in a similar situation, lost everything to a man who had more power, more money, more guns. I didn't have anyone to help me then." His blue eyes, tired as they were, held steady on hers. "Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales a bit." Something about his honesty, his vulnerability, made Nora's chest tighten. She'd known this man less than 24 hours, yet in that time he'd saved her life, risked his own, and was now willing to give up his savings to help her keep her father's legacy. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "A place to stay for a while will be enough," he assured her. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's another battle." Nora rose reluctantly. "Good night, Finn." As she closed the door behind her, she realized that for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing her troubles alone. Morning arrived with a knock on the saloon door. Nora, who had spent a restless night cleaning up the worst of the destruction, opened it to find Sheriff Taylor looking uncommonly cheerful. "Morning, Miss Davenport. Is O'Malley awake? I've got good news." Finn appeared on the stairs behind her, looking better after a night's rest despite his bandaged arm. "Sheriff," he greeted. "Tell me you've worked a miracle." Taylor entered, removing his hat. "Not quite a miracle, but I did call in every favor owed to me in this town. I've got $1,200 from folks who respected Patrick Davenport." He handed Finn an envelope. "Combined with the $500 you mentioned you had, you should have enough to settle with Holly's." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. "I don't know what to say. Those people had no obligation to help me. They're doing it for Patrick," Taylor said. "And because they don't want to see Holly's add another business to his growing empire. The man's getting too powerful as it is." Finn counted out the money, adding his own contribution. $2,000 exactly, he confirmed, handing the full amount to Nora. "What time is Holly's expecting you?" "Noon," she replied, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. "Then we have a few hours to prepare," Finn said. "Sheriff, is there anything you can tell us about Holly's that might help?" "His temperament, his methods," Taylor's expression darkened. "He's not a man who likes to lose. Even when he's paid, he tends to hold grudges, and he doesn't always fight fair." "You think he might try something even after she pays?" Finn asked. "I wouldn't put it past him," Taylor admitted. "But there's not much I can do officially. He's careful to keep his worst business within the bounds of the law technically, at least." "We understand," Nora assured him. "Thank you for everything, Sheriff." After Taylor left, Nora and Finn spent the morning preparing the saloon for reopening. Despite his injured arm, Finn helped move the remaining intact furniture back into place and sweep up broken glass. As they worked, Nora told him about her childhood in Fort Benton, how her father had raised her alone after her mother died of pneumonia, teaching her everything from bookkeeping to pouring the perfect whiskey. "He sounds like he was ahead of his time," Finn commented as they righted a heavy table together. "Most men wouldn't think to teach their daughters such things." "He always said I was twice as capable as any son would have been," Nora smiled at the memory. "What about your family?" Finn's movements slowed. "Lost my parents young. Raised by an uncle who didn't much care for having another mouth to feed. Left home at 16, worked cattle drives, tried mining, eventually found I had a knack for tracking people who didn't want to be found." "And the situation you mentioned, losing everything. What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "I had a small ranch in Wyoming, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Man named Blackwell wanted the land for its water access. When I wouldn't sell, there was a fire. Lost everything, the house, the barn, most of my stock. Couldn't prove he was behind it." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly, understanding now why he'd been so determined to help her. "What did you do?" "Became a bounty hunter. Figured if I couldn't find justice for myself, I could at least bring it to others." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's nearly 11. You should get ready to meet Holly's." Nora nodded, suddenly nervous despite the money secured in her pocket. She retreated upstairs to change into her best dress, a modest navy blue that had been her Sunday best before her father's death. When she returned downstairs, Finn was cleaning his revolver at one of the tables. "You don't have to come with me," she told him. He didn't look up from his work. "Yes, I do." Something in his tone told her arguing would be pointless. "Holly's will be bringing his men," she warned. "I expected as much." Finn holstered his weapon and stood. Ready, they walked the short distance to Holly's office on Front Street. The building was one of the newest in town, a 2-story brick structure that housed his various business interests, mostly loans and property investments, though rumor had it he was involved in less reputable ventures as well. Victor Holly's was waiting for them, a tall, lean man in his 40s with cold eyes and an expensive suit. 2 men flanked his desk, their hands resting none too subtly on their sidearms. "Miss Davenport," Holly's acknowledged with a thin smile. "I see you've brought a friend." "I don't believe we've had the pleasure, Mr. O'Malley," Finn replied without offering his hand. "I'm here to make sure this transaction goes smoothly." Holly's eyebrows rose slightly. "I assure you, my business dealings are always smooth when the other party fulfills their obligations." His gaze shifted to Nora. Speaking of which, do you have my money, Miss Davenport, or will you be signing over the deed today? Nora stepped forward and placed the envelope on his desk. $2,000, as agreed. Hollis looked genuinely surprised as he counted the money. Well, well. I confess I didn't expect you to manage this. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You must have gone to extraordinary lengths to raise such a sum overnight. The debt is paid, Finn interjected before Nora could respond. That concludes your business with Miss Davenport. Not quite, Hollis said, his smile never reaching his eyes. There's the matter of interest. Interest wasn't mentioned yesterday, Nora protested. A simple oversight on my part. The agreement your father signed clearly states interest of 10% per month. It's been 3 months since his death, so that's an additional $600. Finn stepped forward. That's not going to happen, Hollis. The debt is paid in full, as you demanded yesterday, unless you'd like the sheriff to review all your loan agreements for predatory terms. One of Hollis's men moved his hand to his gun, but Hollis raised a hand to stop him. There's no need for threats, Mr. O'Malley. I'm simply a businessman protecting my interests. Your interest was protecting a debt you claimed was owed. That debt is now settled. Finn's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. For a tense moment, Nora thought Hollis might escalate the confrontation. Instead, he slid the money into a drawer and produced a document. Very well. This states that Patrick Davenport's debt to me is paid in full. He signed it with a flourish and handed it to Nora. I hope your saloon prospers, Miss Davenport. It would be a shame if some future misfortune forced you to consider selling after all. The threat hung in the air as they left Hollis's office. Once outside, Nora released a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He's not going to let this go, is he? She asked quietly. Finn shook his head. Men like Hollis don't like losing. We'll need to be careful. She glanced up at him. You're staying then. I said I would, he reminded her. Besides, I think you might need a partner for a while, at least until Hollis finds a new target for his ambitions. Relief flooded through her. The room upstairs is yours for as long as you want it. And I'll honor our agreement. You'll have a base for your bounty hunting work. They returned to the saloon, and Nora unlocked the front doors for the first time in days. By evening, word had spread that the Davenport Saloon was back in business. Regular customers returned, curious about the tall, quiet man who now seemed to be Miss Davenport's protector. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Nora ran the saloon with renewed determination, while Finn divided his time between helping her and pursuing his bounty hunting work. When he was away tracking fugitives, Nora worried constantly until he returned, usually with another reward to add to the saloon's growing profits. In his absence, she began making improvements to the place, adding better lighting, hiring a piano player for weekend evenings, expanding the food offerings beyond the basic fare her father had served. Business improved steadily, and with it, Nora's confidence. Finn, for his part, found himself increasingly reluctant to leave Fort Benton for his hunting expeditions. Each time he returned, the saloon felt more like home, and Nora's welcoming smile stirred feelings he'd thought long buried after losing his ranch. One evening in late October, nearly 3 months after their first meeting, Finn returned from a particularly difficult tracking job. He entered the saloon to find it busy with the dinner crowd, Nora moving efficiently between tables, her cheeks flushed with exertion. When she spotted him, her entire face lit up and she hurried over. "You're back," she exclaimed, then immediately composed herself, aware of the curious glances from customers. More quietly, she added, "I was getting worried." Trail took longer than expected, he explained, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance amongst the relatively well-dressed patrons. "Are you hungry? I saved some stew." Without waiting for an answer, she led him to a quiet table in the corner, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a bowl of steaming stew and a plate of fresh bread. "You look tired," she observed as he ate. "Was it dangerous?" "No more than usual." He didn't tell her about the knife fight that had given him the fresh cut on his ribs, or how close he'd come to being caught in a collapsing mine shaft where his quarry had hidden. "There's something different about the saloon," he noted, glancing around. New curtains, Nora smiled. And new glasses behind the bar. The profit from last month was better than I expected. Pride swelled in Finn's chest at her accomplishments. In just 3 months, she transformed the struggling business into a respectable establishment that even attracted families for dinner before transitioning to a saloon in the later hours. I have news, he said after finishing his meal. I tracked down a man with connections to Holly's. Nora leaned forward, instantly alert. Holly's had been quiet since their confrontation, but they both knew he was simply biding his time. What kind of connections? She asked. The kind that involve helping him acquire properties through less than legal means. Finn lowered his voice. Fires, primarily. The man was drunk in a saloon in Deer Lodge, bragging about jobs he'd done. When I pressed him, he admitted setting fire to 3 businesses in Fort Benton over the past 2 years, all of which Holly's later purchased at reduced prices. Nora paled. Do you have proof? His confession, witnessed by the barkeep. I brought him to the sheriff in Deer Lodge, who's sending word to Sheriff Taylor here. Finn reached across the table to touch her hand. Holly's won't be able to threaten you anymore, Nora, not without risking his own neck. The relief in her eyes made the dangerous journey worth every hardship. Thank you, she whispered, turning her hand to grasp his. For everything? That moment of connection was interrupted when the saloon doors burst open and 3 rough-looking men entered. Finn recognized them immediately as Holly's men, though Holly's himself was not among them. The noisy room quieted as the newcomers approached the bar. Nora squeezed Finn's hand once before rising to meet them, professional composure firmly in place. Gentlemen, what can I get for you? Whiskey, the leader growled. 3 glasses. As she turned to pour their drinks, the man added loudly enough for the entire room to hear, heard this place might not be open much longer. Shame to see a woman trying to run a man's business. Finn tensed, but Nora shot him a warning glance as she set the glasses on the bar. That'll be 75 cents. The man slapped down $1. Keep the change. Consider it charity for the soon-to-be destitute. Laughter from his companions was cut short when Finn appeared at the bar. You boys seem to know something the owner doesn't, he said conversationally. Care to share with the rest of us? The leader turned slowly to face him. Well, if it isn't Holly's favorite bounty hunter, word is you've been poking into matters that don't concern you. If those matters involve threatening Miss Davenport or her business, they very much concern me. The saloon had gone completely silent, patrons watching the confrontation with nervous anticipation. Nora moved from behind the bar to stand beside Finn, a united front against the intruders. Mr. Holly's doesn't take kindly to interference, the man continued. He sent us with a message, back off or things might get unpleasant. Interesting timing, Finn replied. I've just delivered a message of my own to Sheriff Taylor about Mr. Holly's business practices. I suspect he'll be too busy answering questions to worry about the Davenport Saloon anymore. Uncertainty flickered across the man's face. What are you talking about? Ask your boss about his associate who couldn't hold his liquor in Deer Lodge, the one who liked to talk about fire jobs. The 3 men exchanged glances. Whatever they'd expected, this wasn't it. Now, Finn continued, you can finish your drinks quietly and leave, or you can cause trouble and meet Sheriff Taylor sooner rather than later. Your choice. For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then the leader knocked back his whiskey in one gulp and set the glass down hard. This ain't over, he muttered, but he signaled his companions, and they departed without further incident. As the door closed behind them, the saloon erupted in murmured conversations. Several patrons approached Nora to express support or ask questions. Finn slipped away during the commotion, heading upstairs to his room, suddenly exhausted from the confrontation on top of his long journey. Later that night, after closing, Nora knocked softly on his door. When he opened it, she was holding a medical kit and a bottle of whiskey. I saw you favoring your right side, she explained. You're hurt and didn't tell me. Finn hesitated, then stepped back to let her enter. It's just a scratch. Let me be the judge of that. Her tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, he unbuttoned his shirt to reveal a makeshift bandage stained with blood. Nora made a sound of dismay and immediately set to work removing it. "This is more than a scratch, Finn. Why didn't you say something?" The knife wound, though not deep, was several inches long across his ribs. "I've had worse," he said, wincing as she cleaned the cut with whiskey-soaked cloth. "That's not reassuring." Her hands were gentle despite her scolding tone. "You could have told me. You had enough to worry about." She paused in her ministrations to look up at him. "That's not how partnership works. We share burdens, remember?" Something in her gaze made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. "I'm not used to having someone to share burdens with," he admitted. "Neither am I," she said softly, "but I'm learning." As she applied a clean bandage, her fingers lingered against his skin, and Finn found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the faint lavender scent of her hair, the concentration in her green eyes as she worked. "Thank you," he said when she finished, his voice rougher than he intended. "For taking care of me." "You've been taking care of me since the day we met," she replied, gathering her supplies. "It's the least I can do." But as she turned to leave, Finn caught her hand. "Nora," he began, then faltered, uncertain how to express what he was feeling. She waited, her pulse quickening beneath his fingers. "I'm glad I found you that day," he finally said, "even under those circumstances." A soft smile curved her lips. "So am I." Then, with gentle boldness, she leaned up and pressed a brief kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Finn." After she left, Finn stood motionless for several minutes, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, wondering when exactly the woman he'd rescued from despair had become so essential to his own happiness. The next morning brought news that Sheriff Taylor had indeed received information from Deer Lodge and had brought Victor Hollies in for questioning. By noon, the entire town was buzzing with the story. Hollies had been arrested for conspiracy to commit arson, with evidence suggesting he'd orchestrated at least 5 fires in Fort Benton to force property owners to sell. The Davenport Saloon was busier than ever that evening, patrons eager to discuss the downfall of one of the town's most powerful men. Nora moved through the crowd with easy confidence, her smile brighter than Finn had ever seen it. He watched from his usual corner table, pride warming him more effectively than the whiskey in his glass. When she finally joined him during a lull, she was practically glowing. "Can you believe it? Sheriff Taylor says Hollies will likely face prison time. The bank is reviewing all his holdings to determine which were acquired illegally. Justice has a way of catching up eventually," Finn remarked. "Because of you," she pointed out, "if you hadn't tracked down that arsonist." "If I hadn't found you digging that grave," he countered, "none of this would have happened." The reminder of their first meeting sobered them both momentarily. Then Nora reached across the table to take his hand. "I've been thinking," she said, "about our arrangement, the partnership." Finn tensed imperceptibly. Was she going to suggest they end it now that Hollies no longer posed a threat? "With Hollies gone, the saloon is secure," she continued. "You don't need to stay on my account anymore." "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully, his heart inexplicably heavy. "For me to move on?" "No," she said immediately, squeezing his hand. "That's not what I want at all. In fact, I was thinking we might formalize our partnership." "Formalize? The saloon is doing well, better than it ever did under my father. But I've been thinking of expanding, maybe adding rooms for travelers, improving the kitchen for proper dining." Her eyes were alight with possibility. "I have the vision, but you have practical experience I lack. Together, we could build something remarkable." Hope rose in Finn's chest. "You want me to stay as a full business partner?" "I want you to stay," she said simply. "The business is just a part of it." Understanding dawned, and with it, a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. "Nora," he began, but she wasn't finished. "These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. Not just the saloon, but me. I was ready to give up that day you found me, ready to disappear. Instead, I found happiness." She took a deep breath. "With you." The noisy saloon faded to a distant hum as Finn absorbed her words. 3 months ago, he'd been a wanderer, moving from town to town, reward to reward, with no place to call home and no one to return to. Now, looking at the remarkable woman across from him, brave, determined, kind, he couldn't imagine returning to that life. I don't have much to offer, he said honestly. No land anymore, no real home except the room upstairs. I'm not asking for land or possessions, she replied. Just you. Finn stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her to her feet. The curious glances of patrons went unnoticed as he drew her closer. In that case, he said softly, I'm all yours. Their first kiss, there in the middle of the busy saloon her father had built, felt like the beginning Finn had promised her that fateful day, a beginning neither of them had dared to imagine. Spring arrived in Fort Benton with the first steamboats of the season, bringing goods, travelers, and renewed activity to the frontier town. The Davenport Hotel and Saloon, as it was now called, flourished under its joint proprietors, who had married in a small ceremony over the winter. The building itself had been transformed, the upper floor converted into comfortable guest rooms. The saloon portion now separated from a proper dining room where families could enjoy meals without the rowdiness of the bar. A new sign hung proudly out front, bearing both their names, O'Malley and Davenport. Finn still occasionally took bounty hunting jobs, but increasingly he found fulfillment in helping run the business and in the life he was building with Nora. Their rooms above the saloon had become a true home, filled with books, mementos from his travels, and items that had belonged to Nora's parents. On a warm May evening, they stood together on the small balcony outside their rooms, watching the sunset over the Missouri River. Nora leaned against Finn's chest, his arms encircling her waist, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her stomach, their first child, due in the autumn. What do you think about the name Patrick if it's a boy? Nora asked, covering his hand with hers. I like it, Finn agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And if it's a girl, maybe Hope, she suggested after a moment's thought. It seems fitting, Finn smiled against her hair. Hope O'Malley, I like the sound of that. As the sky deepened to purple and the first stars appeared, Nora turned in his arms to face him. Do you ever think about that day when you found me? Often, he admitted, though not with sadness anymore. I was so certain my life was over, she marveled. I couldn't see any path forward. And I was just passing through, Finn added, if I'd taken a different trail that day. The thought was too painful to complete. Instead, Nora rose on tiptoes to kiss him, a gesture that still sent warmth spreading through his chest. Thank you, she whispered against his lips, for showing me that my life wasn't over. It was just beginning, he finished for her, drawing her closer as the stars multiplied overhead, for both of us. In the years that followed, the story would become something of a legend in Fort Benton, how a desperate woman digging her own grave and a bounty hunter with demons of his own had found redemption in each other, building a life and legacy from the brink of despair. Their children, Patrick and later twin girls Hope and Faith, grew up hearing variations of the tale, though Nora and Finn kept certain details private, sacred between them. The Davenport Hotel and Saloon became a Fort Benton institution, known for its hospitality and fair dealing. Finn eventually gave up bounty hunting altogether, finding that the excitement of building a business and raising a family satisfied his restless spirit more completely than chasing outlaws ever had. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Finn took Nora riding to the spot where he'd found her that day. The shallow grave had long since been reclaimed by prairie grass, no trace remaining of the desperation that had driven her there. It's strange, she remarked as they dismounted, to think that the worst day of my life led to everything good that followed. Finn gathered her into his arms, his love for her only deepened by the decade they'd shared. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. As they stood together on that sun-drenched hill, surrounded by wildflowers where once there had been only dust and despair, they were living proof of that truth, two souls who had found in each other not just survival, but the fullest expression of life's possibilities.